Islam is probably the most controversial religion of the 21st century. However, that shouldn't come as a surprise because it has been questioned ever since it began, over 1400 years ago. In those days, the questions that were asked were regarding bringing change to a nation and whether a person could give up their lifestyle and family so they could live under the rule of God. There were severe consequences for choosing to be a Muslim in those early days. It would usually lead to being disowned by your family, public torture, or in some circumstances, death. In today's world, those problems don't exist, but there are still issues regarding the religion which are under scrutiny and questions are still being asked. The questions being asked today are very different. They focus on terrorism, women, morality, violence, and more. People find it hard to understand these topics, and many believe that Islam needs to move on and change its ways to accommodate for the times that we all live in. I searched for non-Muslims to see what their views are on these topics and try to understand how they feel about the ideas and rules of Islam. I also spoke to Muslims and listened to them give their opinions on these subjects, hoping to find an explanation and get an idea to why people may not understand Islam. Many people believe that Islam is oppressive towards women because it forces them to cover up, it takes away the rights of women, and they aren't regarded as equal to men. If this is true, then it doesn't make sense as to why, out of 100,000 British people that converted to Islam in the past decade, over 60% of them are females.
The way I see it, it's supposed to be balanced, right? So when you give a right to one gender, then you want the similar rights for the other gender as well. That's how I see it. But for example, in Islam, in a court, the testimony of two women counts for one man.
After doing a bit of research, I thought, like, for example, in Saudi Arabia, I don't want, before they weren't allowed to vote or even be run for public election, but now they're allowed. But I think simple things like they can't drive, they can't even leave their own country, or they have to have a male escort wherever they go. But then I think that's not part of Islam, that's just part of culture.
I think especially when it comes to Muslim women, their identities are often bypassed and often overlooked, and instead we look for other voices to represent them all the time.
I know that male members of the family inherit twice as much inheritance. Compare that to Christian culture, I think from my perspective that's quite difficult to understand. Living in a Western society where women and men are 50% equal. So that could be quite confusing to some people who have no prior knowledge of Islam.
A Muslim man can take up to 4 wives, and I know that in the Western world it is seen as something like quite bizarre and something that they would never be able to get used to. But if you actually put it into context, the revelation regarding that was passed down only when a number of battles had taken place. A lot of men had lost their lives, so a lot of women were left widowed and a lot of children left orphaned. So as a result, men were given the option to take more than one wife to offer them the protection and the security. Now no other religion does that.
إن الذين يرمون المحصنات الغافلات المؤمنات لعنوا في الدنيا والآخرة ولهم عذاب عظيم.
As humans, we like to see, if we're talking to somebody, we like to see their face, because at least then we can judge, or we can judge just to make sure as in whether they can actually understand what we're saying or whether they can actually relate to us. But now, if you've got that guard in front of you, then it's like you're scared. You're telling me you're scared to come out to the world and show us.
Because many times people they'll do a £1 million business deal over the phone. They're not even seeing the other person. He's on the other side of that Atlantic, and they've done that. And all your phone deals that you do, and you order things over the phone. And so if you don't see the person, all you can hear is their voice. No one's ever complained about that. So if a woman comes to you and she wants to get served at the supermarket, and all she's doing is buying a loaf of bread, saying, "I need to see your face because I don't feel comfortable," I don't think that's fair.
It's not necessarily about women covering up. It can be a lad in a hooded top and covering up with a scarf. It just makes me nervous. I don't know what's behind that.
So the way I see it, it says that they have to cover their beauty to don't provoke men from, I don't know, whatever bad happens to men. from seeing a pretty woman. But there are no similar rules for men.
The idea of women covering up, if you want to cover up, fair enough, you know, it's up to you. But I'm very much the other way. What people tend to do is give the argument of, well, over here, you know, you can wear, you know, a miniskirt and people dress very provocatively. Well, I don't like that at all. I think women should be forced to cover up to a certain extent, just to have some element of modesty. You hear things like people saying rape victims bring it upon themselves, which obviously I do not agree with at all. But it's the idea that if you go around showing off your body to gosh knows whoever, you know, you don't bring it upon yourselves, but you allow yourself, you allow those thoughts in someone else's mind. Those thoughts are already started.
يا أيها النبي قل لأزواجك وبناتك ونساء المؤمنين يدنين عليهن من جلابيبهن ذلك أدنى أن يعرفن فلا يؤذين وكان الله غفورا رحيما.
The media, I've seen a few where it's been so terrible, where people are forced into marriages and they have to run away, where in terrible situations where they end up death, you know, she's executed for dishonoring the family. But there is a difference. I've learned now there's a difference between forced marriages and arranged marriages.
It's not part of Islam. People are free to actually choose who they marry. So down, as I illustrated before, it is down to culture.
Islam does not allow a person to force. Look, even in the Qur'an when it talks about marriage as well, it says tashawur. We use the word tashawur. Tashawur means when two people basically agree on something, or the two people discuss something.
You know, you do read every single week about people sort of disappearing to Pakistan, young girls going over getting married, and in some cases getting married to older men as well, which again from a Western perspective isn't something that I can get my head around.
Forced marriages aren't a part of Islam, and they actually negate any legality to a Muslim marriage. So if a Muslim was to be married under these circumstances where they were forced, it wouldn't be valid.
As a father, you have the right over your daughter. You can marry her off to anyone you want.
A woman has a right to weigh up her compatibility, you know, with the male. And if this male is not compatible to her, then she has the right to reject that partner or the chosen partner.
يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا يحل لكم أن ترثوا النساء كرها ولا تعضلوهن لتذهبوا ببعض ما آتيتموهن إلا أن يأتين بفاحشة مبينة وعاشروهن بالمعروف فإن كرهتموهن فعسى أن تكرهوا شيئا ويجعل الله فيه خيرا كثيرا.
Probably the most talked about and misunderstood subject of today is how Islam deals with violence, terrorism and jihad. Some people believe that Islam is all for striking fear into the hearts of innocents with terror attacks, and events such as 9/11 and 7/7 would be evidence to that. Today there are over 1.5 billion Muslims in the world, which is just over 20% of the whole population. If Islam encourages Muslims to act in such manners, surely we would have a much bigger problem on our hands.
Well, like as a teacher, you realise by talking to the kids that their perception of Islam is very much what you've just said, the idea of being spread by the sword.
I mean, historically, it came out of Arabia with sword, right? They conquered Persian Empire, they went all the way to Spain, and it was done by the means of swords.
The Muslims, obviously, when they went out of Arabia, they were in thousands. That the first battle they fought against Romans, obviously numerically the Romans were 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 times more than the Muslims in the army. And we know that when the Muslims used to fight, every single able-bodied man used to go. So that was literally the whole all the Muslims. There were only about 40-50,000 Muslims going out at that time anyway. And there was always a numerical advantage. And obviously, and technology-wise as well, if you look at the accounts, even the Muslim battles and stuff, they talk about how the enemy base where they're fighting against were technically more superior to them in weapon-wise and stuff. So it doesn't make sense that the Muslims will actually force into the sword if you're less in number, plus the other side have got better weapons as well, they've got a better organisation, they've got soldiers that are trained in combat and stuff like that, and the population as well are actually proper practicing Christians. It doesn't make sense that you'd go with a sword and you took over the whole country or the whole Roman Empire or the Byzantine Empire and you basically force them to become Muslim.
Even within Islam itself, all the different sects and stuff in places like Iraq, and where there've been sort of uprisings in the Middle East at the moment. Everyone's fighting for power and sort of trying to implement their own version of Islam as well. But going back to the Crusades and stuff, it's always been religion by the sword, hasn't it? Religion's got a violent past.
If you think about the Crusades, it was the Christians and the Muslims. You think about any religion, the sword is involved. That does not mean that they rely on the sword and the sword alone. So I would not say that Islam is wholly and solely spread by the sword. Islam is to do with peace, and if it's to do with peace, then it can't wholly and solely rely on the sword.
ادع إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن إن ربك هو أعلم بمن ضل عن سبيله وهو أعلم بالمهتدين.
What has been pointed out to me, like say through my lessons in the start, looking at images of jihad, is the covering of the face during a jihad. I think if you're a soldier for Allah, if you're fighting for a religious reason, why would you cover your face? That was something that one of the kids pointed out to me, and it really triggered something off in my mind. Why would somebody want to cover their face if they're fighting for a religious cause, they're fighting for something that is ultimately right, that is ultimate truth? If Islam is ultimate truth, why would you cover your face? And that might be because they're doing something that would be against the state, and they realise they're doing something against the state and it's punishable, but surely you would want to accept the punishment in order to achieve a greater good in something that is good for your religion.
Going back to when I was about 18 years old, when the Twin Towers happened, I think my idea of jihad through the media was what sort of terrorists, if you like, had hijacked this idea of jihad and made it into a war against the West rather than a personal struggle against sort of temptations of living your life in a bad way.
Jihad, basically, obviously jihad now, that's again, nowadays, especially with the media and stuff, jihad like kind of synonymous with terrorism now. But that obviously, first thing is jihad itself in Arabic means to struggle. So there are different types of jihad, struggling with yourself. Jihad of the nafs, which is called struggling with yourself, is struggling with yourself to act upon the commandments of God. So for example, waking up for the morning prayers in the summer, which is at 4 o'clock, is hard. So when you struggle with yourself and wake up, that's actually considered jihad.
There are explicit content on jihad in Qur'an, so you can't say it's not there. It is there. The jihadis are being promised reward.
We'd never say a person's going for jihad for the sake of wealth. We'd say that the reason is to protect people. The reason is to protect people, whether that's Muslim or non-Muslim.
فإن اعتزلوكم فلم يقاتلوكم وألقوا إليكم السلم فما جعل الله لكم عليهم سبيلا.
The US, especially in Syria at the moment now, a council of 11 people have decided of the rebels to elect somebody as president if Assad is pushed out, who's been a US citizen for 25 years. And again in Afghanistan, Mohammed Karzai, he's put in by the American government. So I think the USA are putting in all of their own chosen people, if you like. So I'm not surprised when people here sort of express discontent and frustration. Going as far as to blowing things up, I think, is taking things a step too far. I suppose you're just as bad as the Americans dropping bombs on innocent people if you're doing that, aren't you? So.
And if the word Islam means peace, then things like terror or inflicting terror on innocent people cannot be allowed. It just doesn't make sense.
So in a way, I understand where the frustration it is, where if you see the whole village getting bombed and there's no justice in that, and people want to retaliate, and it's a form of a guerrilla warfare. You cannot do a face-to-face war against America, so the methods that people have resort to is terrorism.
Islam doesn't justify it. Certain Muslims justify it. And I said to you, it's basically the Qur'an itself is there. The verse is clear that whoever kills an innocent person is as though he's killed the entirety of humanity. Whoever saves one person's life is as though he saved the life of the whole of mankind. That's what the Qur'an says. The hadith, what the Prophet said was that even when you're fighting, when you're on the battlefield, you can't fight, you can't hit an old woman, you can't attack a child, you can't attack religious places, you can't attack religious people, you can't take trees down, you can't cut, you can't destroy the infrastructure of the country and stuff like this.
If you think of, if someone says terrorist, the first thing which will pop into your mind is a guy wearing a turban and a beard. And I have to admit, when I was younger, after like 7/7, I was scared. Because let's say, for example, after 7/7, I couldn't even ride the underground because I was thinking anytime I saw like an Asian guy with a beard and a bag, I got scared. But as in, that's from fear, because it's in, from what I saw in the media, I was thinking, if I see a guy with a brown man with a beard, I'm thinking he's a threat. It's just like, for example, when we see TV, as in if you see a black guy with a hoodie, you're thinking automatically you think he's a thief.
من أجل ذلك كتبنا على بني إسرائيل أنه من قتل نفسا بغير نفس أو فساد في الأرض فكأنما قتل الناس جميعا ومن أحياها فكأنما أحيا الناس جميعا.
Islam to many people began just over 1400 years ago, but to Muslims it has been the only religion since the world began. A lot of the rules that Muslims live by today are very alien to most people, and many people believe that these rules need to change in order for Islam to fit better into today's society. Christianity has changed a lot since the days of Jesus, and today there are many versions of the Bible, which has produced many different sects within the Christian faith. Although there are different sects within Islam, they all share the same belief in the Qur'an, and for the past 1400 years, it has never been changed.
I've come from a Roman Catholic family, and my younger brother's gay, and I've grown up as a Roman Catholic as well, and he's taken a step back from the church. He says, well, how can I be part of something that says what I'm doing is evil and wrong, the way I live my life. So, but I do think that the church, the Catholic Church, and Islam and Judaism all need to modernise and change with the times, because a lot of the things we're living our lives by are looking at the words in our holy books were from times of 1500, 2000 years ago.
I agree with when religion is backward, it needs to be backward, because I personally, although I'm not a religious person, I think it brings a lot of stability, brings a lot of good, especially to people sometimes, I think it brings a lot of harmony within themselves.
If it would change according to the needs of the time, then it would be something else. It would be science. It wouldn't be religion. I mean, in my point of view, religion is something which is in the past, and it basically tries to keep the things the same way, within the same framework. And if you take it out of that framework, it's not religion anymore, it's something else.
It's a matter of opinion that it's not made for the 21st century. Again, if you look at people make time in their lives for religion. Those who are atheists and they've converted to Islam, or people that have converted to any other religion, not just Islam, Christianity, Judaism, or any religion, they saw that their lives were empty without religion. Even in the 21st century, with all the advancement that we've got in technology and everything that we've got, they still felt that they're basically lacking something, and they turned back to religion.
For people to say that religion needs to adapt, I'm like, no, because at the end of the day, people should have religious freedoms. If you want to believe in God, that's you, because at the end of the day, that's your own personal faith. So I don't see why people should intervene.
And in terms of science, when you say science, there are things, for example, that are logged in the Qur'an that are being, mentioned and referred to in the Qur'an that have only just been discovered by science. Medical interventions.
There is a conscience that every person possesses, that no matter who the person is, there is a part of them which is calling to the right thing. But Muslims also believe that that's on its own, combined with a person's intellect, isn't enough. That's not enough to be correct in every circumstance and every situation.
Yeah, you see, there are some basic moralities in every religion, including Islam, right? That they are they are really not dependent on the time. They are basic moralities, right? For example, right, I was watching a documentary and they found some bones from some Homo erectus, a different species of human which is extinct now. And that specimen was so crippled that couldn't really move, because he had very severe kind of arthritis in his bones and his joints. But obviously he lived long with that disability, right? And obviously his family, his tribe, or whatever you would call a Homo erectus community, would looking after him. They had this passion about looking after another being, right? So yeah, that's in Islam. Islam says that you have to be kind to people who are like poor or your old parents or elderly, right? That's basic morality. I don't see that coming from Islam or any religion. That's something which is kind of instinctive. That's what humans crave for.
That's one of our assemblies that we do. You treat others as you wish to be treated, and they go through how many religions treat others as you wish to be treated is mentioned as part of. That we are all part of a human race and we all should have a standard for each other and a way of respecting one another, regardless of whether we're God's creations or not.
I mean, if you study the Hadith and if you study the Qur'an, you know, the rights of neighbours and rights of disbelievers, the rights of believers, rights of your parents, rights of children, rights of your brothers and sisters, and rights of poor people, rights of the rich people, rights of the people that are sad. All these kind of different things, scenarios that Islam teaches that you need to do this, pray for this person like this, pray for that person like that. When you see this person, talk to him like this. If this happens to a person, talk to him in this way, and do all those kind of things. Islam teaches that. Obviously the manners, and the Prophet's manners, well, many stories, manners, and obviously, for example, we mentioned before early on about Muslims, Indonesia all being Muslim, from what obviously historical factors that the businessmen, the way they would do their business dealings was what affected the people to become Muslim. They saw how honest they were and how they're transparent they were in their dealings. Obviously, unfortunately, it's not the case today with the Muslims, but then that's what actually basically opened them up to Islam.
ولا تصعر خدك للناس ولا تمش في الأرض مرحا إن الله لا يحب كل مختال فخور.
The difference between Christianity and Islam, for instance, is the concept of Trinity. But other than that, the rulings and the commandments are the same. For example, and this applies to Judaism as well, thou shalt not kill applies to all three faiths. The fundamental, the foundational, the basic principles are shared.
I think there's loads of similarities especially between the holy books as well. I think there are more similarities than there are differences. As I said before, I think it's in the Western society for Christians, I'm talking when I say I mean from Christians, I won't say ability, but our willingness to change our holy books and to have different sort of splinter factions of Christianity, it's a difference. Whereas Islam has tried to stay true to the Qur'an and to the word of Allah.
What we say is the same, is our religious tradition. So when it comes to all of these religions, Islam, when it comes to Christianity, when it comes to Judaism, we all share a tradition of prophets.
In a physical view of the three religions, not if we look at the books, if we look at some things, there are carryover, but there's the New Testament, the teachings of Jesus, and the Hadith, the teachings of Prophet Muhammad, they are very, very unique to each religion. So there is stuff that cross over, and there is stuff that makes it unique and makes it very different to another religion.
Well, as Muslims, we believe, and obviously that's what God has mentioned in the Quran, as Allah has mentioned in the Quran, is that the first religion, the religion acceptable to God, is Islam, and that's what the pure message is as well. Christianity in its pure form is Islam. Judaism in its pure, unaltered form is Islam.
Christianity will always be the main religion, even though not, yes, Islam is now the second biggest one, but Christianity will always be the biggest one. Christianity will always be the biggest one, because at the moment a lot of people still have a fear of Islam, because as in if you take anybody off the road, let's just randomly from the street, and you just ask them what's your view on Islam, the first thing that'll come to mind, people blowing themselves up, women being oppressed. That's the first thing.
If from this question you mean that Islam is worse than Christianity or Judaism or any other religion because it's newer, I think in terms of human development and human progression, that would actually be an advantage. I mean, you would expect that to be an advantage, because I mean, when the time passes by, right, I don't mean that Islam is like better than the other religions or the other religions are worse. What I'm saying that you would thought that Islam being a new religion, you would expect more of it, right? It's actually disappointing.
فتقبلها ربها بقبول حسن وأنبتها نباتا حسنا وكفلها زكريا كلما دخل عليها زكريا المحراب وجد عندها رزقا قال يا مريم أنى لك هذا قالت هو من عند الله إن الله يرزق من يشاء بغير حساب.
In my opinion, there is much more to Islam than meets the eye, or what people may see in the news. Islam has been infiltrated by certain organizations, ideologies and cultures, which have caused non-Muslims and some Muslims to assume that certain rules are a part of Islam, when in reality they aren't. I think a solution to these problems would be for people to find out for themselves what the religion actually teaches, rather than listening to the media or certain individuals.
يريدون ليطفئوا نور الله بأفواههم والله متم نوره ولو كره الكافرون.